Hi, Shri. Hello. Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Shirley. Hi.
Yeah, hi.
Good morning, ma'am.
Guys, just check the audio.
Good morning, Alka.
Yeah, good morning, Vishakha. Yeah,
Can you?
I just wanted to be sure that the audio is fine. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
good. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Alka.
Hi, Shirley.
Vishakha. Vishakha.
Yes, Shirley.
Vishakha, do mention that the principal sends her greetings.
Yes. I've noted that down, Shirley. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good
I
morning,
think we
ma'am.
can start this. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Professor AVIJIT Pathak.
Good morning,
Good
sir.
morning, everyone.
Good morning to
Respected
everybody.
sister, Professor AVIJIT Pathak, colleagues, and my dear friends, I welcome you all to Gijubhai Memorial Lecture. Our principal, Dr. Sandra Joseph, could not be present, so she sent her best wishes for everyone, and especially to you, Dr. Professor AVIJIT Pathak. I now request, is sister here? I request sister to start the session with a small prayer. Sister here? Prabjot, has sister been able to join?
No, I haven't received any.
request from her. I have sent her another link.
Yeah, she's trying to join.
Yeah.
Just- Okay, I think she's facing a little trouble in joining, so we can continue. Gijubhai Memorial Lecture is an annual event organized by the Department of Elementary Education, Jesus and Mary College, to facilitate discourse in education within India. It is named after the renowned educationist Gijubhai, who was influenced by the writings of Maria Montessori. He developed simple and practical means to address educational issues in classroom. Gijubhai Memorial Lecture Series has provided an enriching platform for educational dialogue, deliberation, and learning. Every year, the lecture is organized around a critical educational theme. This year, the pandemic has deeply affected the teaching and learning process and has brought to fore varied inequalities that require wider deliberation. In such times, it is relevant that we reflect on the meaning of being a teacher. We are very grateful that Professor AVIJIT Pathak accepted our invitation. I now request Dr. Prabjot Kaur to introduce the speaker. Prabjot, you're on mute.
Okay. Thank you, Isha. Good morning, everyone. Our speaker for the session, Professor AVIJIT Pathak, teaches at the Center for the Study of Social Systems, Jawaharlal University. His research interests include sociology of organization, social theory, and sociology of education. In his more than 30 years of teaching and research experience, Professor Pathak has authored many books and published papers in national and international journals. Some of his prominent books are Modernity, Globalization and Identity, Towards the West, Recalling the Forgotten, Education and Moral Quest, 10 lectures on education, pedagogy and sociological sensibility. His articles regularly feature in leading newspapers such as The Hindu, The Indian Express, and The Wire. In his editorials, Professor Pathak typically reflects on the ideas of modernity, those of education, and on varied political issues. His recent writings and lectures on education and the work of the martyrs have guided him to understand the social and pedagogical concerns that have unfolded due to the pandemic situation and their implications for the teaching and learning process. We thank him once again for agreeing to be the speaker for the Gijubhai Memorial Lecture. We welcome Professor Pathak and we look forward to his talk.
Should I begin now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning to everybody. And I'm really grateful to you, to the college, to the education department for giving me an opportunity to deliver this important lecture. Thank you very much. Whenever, as a social scientist, as a teacher, I think of Gijubhai Badeka with absolute humility and gratitude. And whenever I think of him, what comes to my mind is the art of possibilities. He was the embodiment of art of possibilities. He was one of those rare educationists who took his dreams seriously and who made it possible for all of us to realize that education could come out of boring, dull, routinized, mechanized, bureaucratic process of learning. Education could be a celebration. Education could be a joyful activity. He also reminded all of us of the possibilities in creatively nuanced critical pedagogy and the beauty of a dialogic engagement between the teacher and the taught, between the teacher and the child. In other words, beyond textbooks, bookish knowledge, ritualization of exams, grades, and certificates, here was an educationist who would make us believe that education could be a celebration. It could be musical, it could be playful, and it could activate the faculties which are really important in life, the faculties of wonder, curiosity, criticality, and awakened intelligence. So I'm really happy that the college organizes a lecture, and when it happens, that with absolute gratitude and humility, we recall what he did in the short span of life that he lived. And when I think of him, simultaneously as a student of education, what comes to my mind is also the contribution of a galaxy of educationists, primarily Jiddu Krishnamurti, Rabindranath Tagore, and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Now, when we think of them together, then something happens to us. We possibly get the inspiration to see education, the process of transaction of ideas, knowledge, the activation of the faculties of learning, and the relationship between the teacher and the child in a different way, through an altogether different paradigm, and to have a new possibility. With this art of possibility that Gijubhai reminded us of, I begin today's lecture. I'm not going to speak anything bookish or abstract. What I wish to do is that as a teacher and as a keen observer of human life and society, during last 10 to 11 months, the experiences we passed through, the way we saw the world, and the way we looked at ourselves, our vocation, our engagement with students. With those experiences, I would just share some of my ideas with you. And your task is not necessarily to agree with me. At the end of my presentation, you can interrogate me, you can critique me, because we only evolve and grow, not necessarily through mathematical agreement. We evolve and grow through ambiguities, through contradictions, and through multiple ways of seeing and looking at the world. Now, having said that, let me come to the centrality of the theme today, the meaning of being a teacher at the time of the pandemic. Now, let me begin, and I think which is very important for all of us as students, teachers, as educationists, social sciences, heightened reflexivity and self-critique. Because no learning, no understanding of the world is possible without reflexivity and without a high degree of self-critique. So I would begin my presentation as a teacher with high degree of reflexivity and heightened self-critique. I would critique myself time and again. And with that, I just wish to share some of my ideas with you. To begin with, just all of us, think of the pandemic. You need not be a professional philosopher, to reflect on it. If your eyes are open, if your heart vibrates, and if you are receptive enough, and if you keep the windows of your consciousness open, you feel it, you see it. So what was happening in the world, say from February, March, the pandemic is not yet over. What was happening in the world? If you think deeply, then you could see that the known world, the world which till yesterday you and I were familiar with, the world that you and I took for granted, that world crumbled, that world collapsed, everything stopped. And just think of it deeply. With the pandemic, when the taken for granted world crumbled and collapsed, we could see the following. First, we could see that the breakdown of the modernist notion of order, control, and predictability. It collapsed. Also, what it collapsed is that entire techno-capitalistic notion of productivity. The techno-capitalistic notion of productivity, modernist notion of order, predictability, and control, and also a very unilinear notion of time, progress, and the future. That we are the masters of the world. We can predict our future. We can control our future. And the life can go on with the gospel of unlimited techno-economic progress, and none can stop us. We are the masters of the world. Suddenly that world crumbled and collapsed. We could see the airports, and the planes are not flying, lying in the airport, empty railway stations, empty streets, the markets closed, everything closed. We got confined to our own rooms, to our own tiny apartments. And suddenly we could see that the world that we took for granted, that world has changed. That world has lost its meaning, and that world has completely crumbled. It was also the time when also we could see death lost its grace and meaning. Chaotic crematoriums, chaotic hospitals, and absolutely ugly, lonely, insulated death. And there was nobody, no loved one, to be with the someone infected with the coronavirus and dying at the intensive care unit of a hospital. And even it would be difficult for the loved ones to be at the crematorium at that time. So death became merely a number, a statistics. It lost its grace, it lost its meaning. So we were living at that time. And also it was also the time when we could see the nakedness of the social reality we live in. The kind of untouchability that prevails in a terribly caste-ridden society like ours, the exclusion, untouchability, hierarchy, that manifested itself rather sharply again in a new avatar. Gated communities in Bombay, Delhi, Calcutta, Bangalore very soon closed their doors for the entire brigade of maids, domestic help, and the others. And we could also see the agony of the migrant workers, hungry, crippled, humiliated workers from Surat, Ahmedabad, and other places, walking miles after miles, in the process dying, being killed by accident, and coming to the unknown villages in Jharkhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, and Bengal. We did see the nakedness of social inequality and hierarchy. And also we could see the futility of pride and arrogance, because it was something that didn't come only in the Dharbi slum in Bombay or in Trilokpuri in Delhi. Even the rich and the powerful and the privileged could not escape it. Corona entered, everywhere, entered the corridors of Amit Shah and Amitabh Bachchan, Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. So it was everywhere. It was all pervading. So a lot of churning was going on at that time. It was a time of psychic turmoil, existential uncertainty, fear of death, and acute loneliness. It was the time in which we were living. And when you think of this time, and simultaneously a huge economic loss, joblessness, anxiety of losing the job, salary cut, joblessness, and all sorts of political economic crisis that confronted us. And simultaneously, existential uncertainty, psychic bewilderment, fear of death, and the crisis of a meaning and acute loneliness that we confronted. Possibly that was the time when we all needed at that time the warmth of human touch. That was the time when we needed to be understood, when we needed to be talked to listen to be loved, That was also the time, possibly, when you and I ought to rethink education, the very meaning of education, the very meaning of the teacher-student engagement, the very meaning of what you and I should do at this time when everything that was known has completely collapsed, that we need to rethink education. We needed to rethink the engagement between the teacher and the student, and we needed the ethics of care, empathy, understanding, love. My self-critique emanates from this point. But what did we do as educationists, as teachers at this time, when everything changed and collapsed? Just think of it with some amount of self-critique, and I critique myself as a teacher. What did we do? That we pretended that as if nothing has changed in the world. The only thing that has to be changed is that from face-to-face classroom, we have to come to Zoom or the Google Meet. So Zoom and the Google Meet became the new avatar. And we thought that as such, nothing fundamentally has changed. Only thing that ought to be altered and changed, no more face-to-face classroom in a physically embedded classroom. But now we all would meet on the screen. But at the same time, the same syllabus has to be completed. The same assignments have to be given. The same exams have to be conducted. And the business must go on as usual. And in other words, as educationists, as teachers, our response was not deeper, meaningful, existential. It became merely a technical response to the question. So we thought the only solution is the transform education now into a software endeavor. It now became merely an issue of techno miracle, a technological miracle. And that was the way we responded to it. And just try to see its absurdity. And when I speak of it of absurdity, I just want you to think of it. Imagine a situation of that time, the month of May, June, July, number of infections going up, death rate is going high, private hospitals, refilling their naked profit-making drive, even at that moment of the pandemic. It was at that time. Now, for example, what we were doing as teachers, what we were doing. So, for instance, merely a 3-year-old kid of a fancy place school in Bangalore has to sit in front of the laptop for 3 hours. And the fancy teacher must teach her at that time the perfect technique of drawing the sun coming out from the hill. So it has to be taught. It has to be learned at that time. The world is burning. People are dying. Crematoriums are overcrowded. Parents are losing their jobs. Someone or other has been infected with the corona positive, but the business must go on as usual. So the child has to learn the perfect lesson of drawing the sun. Or in a Delhi University sociology honors class, a girl who has just seen that her aunt has been diagnosed with COVID positive and the father is not very sure of returning the job, has to sit in front of the laptop, and the professor at that time must complete the syllabus and deliver an absolutely boring mechanized lecture on Talcott-Parsons structure of social action. Or, for instance, a child who has to borrow, of a student of class 6, has to borrow only one smartphone available in a family of 6 people from the father, and must learn, as the teacher in the online class would tell him, that NCERT Mathematics Class 7 chapter on geometry and the measurement of the area, that what is the area of the trapezium and how to draw the area of a trapezium. At that time, the child must learn it, and the questions would be asked in the exam. So see, I just want you to look at that absurdity of the entire thing. It's like saying the world outside is burning and inside you pretend that the business can go on as usual. Same assignments have to be given. Students have to be bombarded with the assignments. And then the teachers have to, report to the higher authorities how many online classes they have taken, whether the syllabus has been completed, In other words, our response to it was absolutely mechanical, life-killing. We didn't behave. We didn't think the way educationists would think. The way, for example, educationists like Gijubhai or Krishnamurti or Tagore could have responded to a situation like this. So we became absolutely responded to it in a very, very mechanized, techno-bureaucratic manner. And with that, my critique emerges. I evolved my critique precisely because of that in which we were all engaged at that time. We all needed ethics of care, understanding, communication. Just think of LSR student Aishwarya Reddy's suicide. It was just one suicide in a series of suicides. Not just the question of the digital divide that prevails in an extremely unequal society like ours. Apart from that, when this story of suicide came, one question I often asked myself, and I shared it with many of my colleagues. Did Aishwarya, feel confidence in us, in teachers? Did she ever feel that easiness, that confidence that she could talk to us, she could communicate with us, she could speak of her misery, of her existential crisis, of the psychic anxiety she was passing through? Or did she fear us? That no, if I do not attend classes, my teacher would be angry with me. My attendance sheet would be very bad, attendance registrar, and then I might fail in the examination. So teacher is only someone who declares a student as success and failure and gives grades. Beyond that, there is no engagement between the teacher and the student. If that is the reality, if the suicide of Aishwarya also reveals a situation like this, there is something that as the teaching community, we all need to be worried about. We all ought to reflect on. The world would not have changed. Nothing would have done. Our intelligence would not have been reduced if at that moment we could not have taught delicate persons. We could not have forced a student to learn how to draw the area of a trapezium, or forced a 3-year-old kid how to draw the sun coming out of the mountain. No harm would have been done to human intelligence. But instead of that, as teachers, had we done something else, something qualitatively different, which is in tune with the demand of that time, when the pandemic led to a crisis of this kind, possibly a new mode of engagement and a new kind of new ethics of learning and a new mode of engagement between the teacher and the student would have evolved. Let me give you some of the illustrations to make my point. Think of it, and there are many students of education, elementary education. I just want you to think of it. Think of it. Even online, suppose as a teacher, you are engaging with a child, and you are engaging with a child, and say a child of class 6 at that time, and when the civics textbook is given to them, and at that time, now official curriculum says that chapter 3 of civics textbook, say on the fundamental rights, has to be taught. And it has to be, questions would come in the exam. So, and the system wants us to believe that earthquake or no earthquake, flood or no flood, war or no war, the area of trapezium must be known. The child must know the area of the trapezium, or the child must mechanically, like a parrot, recall the fundamental rights. But at that time, as a sensitive teacher, if you initiate a conversation with the child, with a group, and then in that conversation, possibly then you begin to see that someone has actually seen her mother and the father losing the job at the time of the pandemic. Someone has seen, someone who has been infected with the COVID positive has to move around from hospital to hospital before he or she gets a seat there. Now, can you and I initiate a conversation with a child of this kind, and instead of mechanically teaching NCERT civic textbook on fundamental rights at that time, initiate a conversation with the child and then have a conversation that what kind of a society we live in, what kind of rights we are talking about, which are written in the book. What if would you have done that, to sensitize that? Or for instance, the other day I was talking to a teacher of sociology. Now, she is teaching Indian society, and then she has to teach, M.N. Srinivas, the great social anthropologist, his study of the Rampura village, Then I was asking her, I was requesting her, but why do you teach now mechanically M.N. Srinivas's Rampura village at this moment? Possibly some of your student is staying in a remote village in Bihar with the poor internet connectivity. And possibly that student has seen that how the migrant workers from Surat did enter the village, their ancestral village. But even when they did enter the village, how the villagers didn't allow them to enter into the heartland of the village. They were asked to stay somewhere else. And this student in a remote village is seeing it at that time of pandemic. Is it not the time that the teacher would have a conversation with that student and ask the student that instead of writing a paper, age-old paper on M.N. Srinivas's and Andre Brete and Dubey, their study of village, ask the student how that student himself is seeing the altered character of the social relationships in the village at the time of the pandemic. Then social anthropology would have become richer, would have become meaningful. Then the student, unlike a parrot, mechanically writing what Srinivas and Bete and Dumo has said about caste and village, possibly would have become much more sensitive and saw the world, related to the world that the pandemic has led to. We missed that. We all missed that because we were in a hurry. We were required to complete the syllabus, and that official age-old syllabus we had to complete. Or think of a situation that a teacher of philosophy comes to the class, and what would have happened had instead of a mechanical lecture on Immanuel Kant or Hegel, the teacher one day engages with the students and began with a conversation between Buddha and Ananda. Ananda, Buddha's closest disciple, walking with Buddha for more than 3 decades. And Gautam Buddha's time has come. He is about to die. And then Ananda is crying. And Buddha asking Ananda that, Ananda, you have been living and walking with me for 3 decades. Why do you cry? Don't you know that all that is phenomenal is temporal? And this body is temporal. And this body must fall. The body must wither away the way an old leaf falls from a tree. So it must wither away. But what remains is the Buddhahood, is that consciousness, is that awakened intelligence. That remains. That doesn't die. That has no beginning. That has no end. Now had a professor conversed with the philosophy student at that time, instead of mechanically completing a chapter in the philosophy textbook that the university prescribes, and engaged on that entire meaning of death and life, which in every household at the time of the pandemic, people were bothering about, people were thinking of. We all saw someone near to us, close to us, has got this disease, or someone, a friend's friend, a friend's relative died. I myself saw the parents of my students, many students got it. I saw the father of a student died in a hospital in Delhi at the time of the corona. We all saw it. We all felt it. Now, at that time, What was it that we needed? What was the meaning of philosophy? What was the meaning of, is it only a Delhi University syllabus? Is it only a Jadavpur University syllabus that has to be completed? Even at the time of the pandemic, should we pretend that everything would go on as usual? Or think of class 11 student and you are an English teacher. Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea is not in the syllabus. But just you begin to talk, converse, have a dialogue on Hemingway with the child, that Old Man and the Sea, and that endurance, the endurance that Hemingway talks about, amid that pain and suffering. And at that time, we all felt restless. We are confined to our rooms. We are confined to our houses. And we could not come out. We could not meet our friends. And yet, at that time, we needed that endurance, that perseverance, that patience, which in a hurried existence we have almost lost. We have almost forgotten. And we all felt at that time. And that was the psychic anxiety and the restlessness we all experienced. Had a teacher, Hemingway might not be in the syllabus, in the NCERT syllabus. Hemingway might not be asked in the CBSE board examination. But had the teacher done it at that time? But we didn't do that. Most of us didn't do that. Now, why did it happen? Why we became so callous, so insensitive? And I'm extremely critical of myself. I too have done the same thing, So why did it happen? And this is what just I want you to reflect on, and particularly these young students who one day would become teachers of students of education. Just think of it, friends. Possibly there are two reasons for that. Why as teachers and educationists we felt miserably at the time of the pandemic. One reason, which I want you to think, which I guess is one of the solid reasons for that, why did it happen? What is the self-perception of being a teacher today? Ask this question, the self-perception of being a teacher. And I believe that most of us, as both Ivan Illich and Jiddu Krishnamurti would say, most of us are conditioned. Our mind is conditioned. Our mind is conditioned, and this conditioned mind believes that education is what is written in the printed official syllabus. Education is only the dissemination of the legitimate textbooks. Education is only the ritualization of exams and the task of completing the syllabus and the distribution of degrees and the certificates. Nothing exists beyond this bureaucratic, institutionalized, formalized notion of learning and education. That was one of the important critiques that Ivan Illich evolved about the schooled mind, school consciousness, about the conditioned mind. Jiddu Krishnamurti evolved a critique of the mind that becomes so conditioned, regimented. And it was this conditioned mind with which many of us today begin to define ourselves, that we are just the mediators between the students and the official curriculum. Our task as if is only to complete the syllabus, prepare the students, equip them with some cognitive, intellectual, and technical skills. And if they succeed in the exams, we have done our job pretty well. So quite often we tend to see ourselves like this as teachers. We are just the official mediators between the syllabus, official syllabus, and the students. Nothing beyond that. Or in the age of the market, we are the service providers and the students are just the consumers. We provide skills and the students receive it. And beyond that, no engagement is there. No engagement is possible. So possibly we grew up, we were trained, we are conditioned as teachers like this. And that's why we thought that we are like, that banker, who sits in the teller counter. You come with your check and you have to withdraw 10,000 rupees, and 9 to 12, the banker does it. You give the check, banker gives you the money, and then there is no other engagement. It is just a very technical, very defined, instrumental relationship. So I come to the classroom. Now, 7 days have been allotted for Chapter 7 NCERT text. I complete it. My task is just to complete it. Beyond that, there is not much engagement. So, with that self-perception, possibly many of us thought that even at this time of the pandemic, our task remains the same, just to complete that age-old syllabus, deliver the same lecture, giving the same kind of assignments. That was it. See it absurdity. If at the time of the pandemic, I ask students that write about 4 types of suicide that great sociologist Emile Durkheim talked about. Year after year, this plagiarized question is being asked in our colleges and the universities. And you get ready-made plagiarized answers. Because it's a question, unimaginative question, non-thinking question, and you get the same answer. And you ask this question even at this time, when, for example, a suicide of Aishwarya Reddy or the children committing suicide, or the lot of lonely people thinking of killing themselves at the time of the pandemic, that a new kind of agony has emerged. But seldom do we go beyond Durkheim, because Durkheim is there, the syllabus. So even at that time, I had to do the same mechanical job. And that, I believe, was a great violence, psychic, emotional, spiritual violence in which we all engaged at the time of the pandemic. And this is something that worries me, as a teacher, and that causes a lot of pain and at the same time self-critique. So our identity has become like that because the mind is conditioned. And the second, I think, the danger, and the second reason for that is that, unfortunately, our educational institutions, schools, colleges, and universities, these days, in the age of the market, are being increasingly governed by techno managers. They are not pedagogues. They are not educationists. They are not Gijubhai. They are not Krishnamurti. They are not Tagore. They are not Paulo Freire or the Martin Buber. They are the techno managers, driven by a very techno managerial discourse of efficiency, performance, achievement, ranking, and hierarchy. And in a situation of that kind, when the techno managers run our universities with a very market-driven logic of performance and efficiency, then what does happen? I ask young students to think of it that both you and teacher, students and teacher, now are reduced into products. We become products. So a student becomes a product, a teacher becomes a product. And this product has a measurable index. And that measurable index, there is a mathematics of measurement. So a student is primarily her attendance register, whether 90% attendance, 80% attendance, and then the student is essentially her grade point and her marks. And the teacher is a product. Also, the productivity of that product could be measured through certain mathematical index. Teacher is the number of courses offered, number of articles published in the UGC-approved journals, number of national, international conferences attended, number of lectures delivered. And the university or college is a product, whether LSR is number 1 or the Miranda House is number 1. It is almost like, whether, Preeti Zinta is the beauty queen or the Aishwarya Reddy. Aishwarya is the beauty queen. So it was like everything has to be ranked, hierarchized, So we are all product today. And this production And as a result, this cult of performance and efficiency. So even at the time of the pandemic, so schools have to bother that whether how many toppers they have, because these toppers have to be now sold as product to enhance the prestige value of the skills. So even at the time of the pandemic, a university has to bother that what is its ranking according to the UGC scale. So we all would run, we all would work as the techno managers dictate us, that on the basis of that notion, when you and I have already lost our criticality, reflexivity, humanness, creativity, sensitivity, we all have become robotic performers. So we are robotic performers today with a terrible performance anxiety and the performance that has already been defined by the techno managers. So for a techno manager, if a teacher engages with a conversation with a philosophy student on Buddha and Ananda's dialogue, or a literature teacher speaks of a book which is not part of the syllabus, Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea, in the eyes of the techno managers, the teacher is not doing the right thing. The teacher is not doing the right thing because the teacher is only supposed to do what he or she has been asked to do. Complete the syllabus, upload the assignments of the students, grade the students, and to behave the way the techno managers have asked us to behave. So we are all become cogs in that techno-bureaucratic machine, which is based on that market-driven logic of efficiency, performance, and success. And that was one of the things that is causing a great spiritual crisis, moral crisis, and the ethical crisis in the entire domain of learning in the sphere of education. So this was all that which we saw, which we felt. But I just wish to end, before you ask me questions, I just wish to end with a question that is there a way out? Now the pandemic, 2019, 2020, 21, that pandemic taught us many lessons. Pandemic completely unsettled the world. We all passed through different psychic, emotional, ethical, political, spiritual experiences. Now, sometimes I feel paradoxically that we also begin to see light only when we pass through a dark tunnel. Possibly only passing through that intense darkness, then a new dawn arrives, a new dawn comes, we begin to see a new light. So what could be that new light, that where we would rethink education, we would rethink the meaning of being a teacher, meaning of being a student, and the relationship between the teacher and the student beyond the ritualization of exam and the official task of completing the syllabus. Something more, something surplus, something more deeper, something more beautiful, more meaningful, more enduring. Now, is it possible to think of that, to reflect on that? I believe that one of the, with which I began with Gijubhai's Art of Possibilities. And this art of possibilities, again and again, many great educationists, from Gijubhai to Jilu Krishnamurti, to Paulo Freire, to Martin Buber, to Ivan Illich, many of them did talk about this art of possibilities. And as students of education, you would read Gijubhai, you would read Jilu Krishnamurti, you would read Rabindranath Tagore. But my appeal to you is just not to see it as a syllabus material and to write a term paper on that, to go deep into it, to go deeper into it. And no matter how difficult the situation is, try to create certain kind of possibilities. World was not smooth for Gijubhai. It was not smooth. It was difficult. Yet he took his dream seriously and he tried to make it possible. Likewise, one of the important things and which pandemic has taught us today, that we really ought to rethink the meaning of being a teacher. And in that meaning of being a teacher and the engagement between the teacher and the student, what is important is that, that learning and unlearning continually, and which Jiddu Krishnamurti, in one of his famous speeches, said, "The truth is a pathless land." And when he spoke that truth is a pathless land, then what he essentially meant that we are the wanderers, we are the seekers, we are the wanderers and seekers. It's like being lost into a wild forest. And when we are lost into a wild forest, it has its mystery, it has its beauty. But nobody gets lost in Delhi-Agra Express Highway because it is straightforward. It is unilinear. It has no mystery. It has no puzzling curves. It has no wonder. But in the wild forest, every tree has its own story to tell. Every tree is unique. Every path, every lane, every bylane has its own memory and their own story. And that's why that when we move around it, that we continually learn and unlearn, explore, discover. In other words, a sense of wanderer. One lesson that the pandemic has taught us that we are not proud conquerors of the world. No matter how much Francis Bacon and René Descartes tried about it, we are not proud conquerors. We are humble wanderers of life. We are humble wanderers of life. And with this humble wanderer, imagine the mighty United States today. And the irresistible virus has shattered the self-confidence of the United States today. We are not conquerors. We are the wanderers. And the spirit of being a student and the teacher is the spirit of being a wanderer. And the spirit of being a wanderer, there is a beauty in it. There is a joy in it. It is not merely a techno-managerial task. It is not merely about taking the attendance of students and grading them and completing the syllabus. It is something more, something deeper, and something higher. And I think that is what pandemic has taught all of us. Thank you for listening to me. You can ask me questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And I think your talk has given us a lot of things to deliberate. And I think what struck us was when you said that, the pandemic has really seen this breakdown of control, the modern, order of control. And as teachers, we need to kind of really reflect and think on, how we have to overcome this conditioning of mind, and especially the techno-managerial task in which we've been caught. So thank you so much, sir. I now request you to kind of, students, if you want to ask questions, please, you can ask questions. You want to post comments, you can post comments. We are open to questions. Anyone? I think everybody's taking their time, sir, to kind of absorb and ask some questions. Anybody from the faculty can also probably ask if there is any question, if anything you want to ask.
Ma'am, may I?
Sure, Garima, sure.
Good morning, sir. Ma'am, sir, my question is you said that teachers should focus more on a holistic type of learning where they are not focusing on how to teach according to the books and should consider the students' environment as well, his mental being also. But my question is, how a teacher should cope up with the pressure which she is getting from her uh, means her coordinators or so how teacher should react in that case because she is also under pressure of completing the course and all. So
No, thank you. Thank you for asking this question. You are absolutely right. And that was the point which at the end I was talking about, that why did it happen And it was in that context, there were two things that I was saying. That one, the way we have been conditioned by the system, and the system which today is increasingly being governed by the techno managers with certain notion of performance, certain notion of ranking and the hierarchy and the success, and the notion of productivity. And that was what, I was asking all of you to think of it. And I would say that possibly the light I'm talking about at the end, that it is possible only when we need a new kind of movement, a movement by teachers, a movement by students, a new kind of movement, a movement in which we would assert, we would demand, we would pressurize that education is not just this. Education is not just about completing the syllabus. Education is not just about the fetish of 100% marks in the board examination. Education has a much more deeper meaning and the deeper connotation. Unfortunately, what happens that, these deeper issues, these fundamental issues are seldom talked about, are seldom referred to. So generally in our consciousness, we tend to believe that some good ideas of education that would be museumized. Occasionally we talk about Gijubhai, occasionally we talk about Rabindranath Tagore, but we would worship them, we would museumize them, but they are distant, they are impractical, they are utopian. And the only thing that you and I have to do is that what we have been doing. And that was the conditioning. And that conditioning was reflected at that time, even at the time of that pandemic, which is an unusual time. None of us felt, experienced, saw it like this. Even at that time, hardly any major reflection came from us, from teachers, that should we now rethink? Should we rethink? Have a different kind of engagement with the students? So that was the thing that I was talking about. It was not just that the solution would come from X, Y, Z as individual. It requires a collective churning, collective thinking, collective struggle, collective process of self-churning. And if as students and teachers, we do not acknowledge the problem, so acknowledge that it is a problem. That quite often we refuse to acknowledge the problem by arguing that what else could we have done? That's fine, but acknowledge the problem, that it's a problem. It is a problem, and somehow this problem has to be addressed. And only when we acknowledge this problem, only then possibly some movement to take place so that we can redeem ourselves. We could alter ourselves. We could think of a better possibility. And that was what I'm talking about, the art of possibility. And art of possibility. This was what I was saying, and that's why the example I gave. Suppose I'm teaching as a DU teacher, a chapter on Indian society, anthropology. Now, I think that freedom at least I have, that if instead of asking the student to write an assignment, the age-old assignment on M.N. Srinivas's Rampura village, I ask a student caught up in an unknown village in Bihar and seeing the changing landscape of the village when the migrant workers enter there from Surat, to write the anthropology of that village. The student would learn anthropology much more meaningfully. The student would mechanically repeat what the professor has dictated in the notes or what is there in the champion guidebooks. So the learning would become much more meaningful, and learning would become sensitive to the occasion, sensitive to the pandemic. Now, this is where we all ought to rethink, reimagine, rethink. And this is what I am saying, that to be a wanderer, that we become a wanderer, that when, that we keep our eyes open, we become reflexive. We allow ourselves to be puzzled, to be disturbed, instead of moving towards absolute certainty. that as if nothing more we have to do except completing the syllabus, or students have to do nothing more than just think of what is written, what is there in the syllabus, and just to become a topper. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
So there is another question that somebody has posted on the YouTube.
Yeah.
This is Rajni Singh. She's written, नमस्ते सर, मैं स्कूल में पढ़ती हूँ. आपकी बात सुन के मुझे सारी बातें सच लगी और मैं लगातार इस द्वंद से गुजर रही हूँ कि मैं खुद एक टेक्नो मैनेजर बनने से कैसे बचूं, अपने टीचर होने को कैसे बचाऊं.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You are the new dawn, and your question really makes me absolutely hopeful. What I like about your question is that, that with absolute sensitivity and honesty, you acknowledge the problem, you feel it, So that is very important, because the faculty of feeling and thinking, in your question, I see both intellectual cognition and experiential feeling. And that, I believe, is very lovely. And the fact that you were saying that, how do I save myself from being a techno manager? I think it is a question. Seldom do children ask a question of this kind, because it is like saying, and we often crack a joke, even when the child is being conceived in the mother's womb, child has not yet come to the earth. The parents have already decided the fate of the child, that by the time the child is 14-year-old, the child would be enrolled into Fitchi or Akash coaching center, and then the child would take admission in Kanpur IIT. So before the child has come to the earth, the child's fate has already been programmed. That's the crisis we are living in, and that's the pressure our children experience today. And a great loss is being done. Someone who could have become a great musician, is living with absolute meaninglessness despite the IIT and IIM degree. Because in that he does not find, he gets a lot of money, but he or she does not find himself. Or someone who could have become a great physicist is becoming a very highly, with a chartered accountant with high salary, but with absolute meaninglessness, and becoming terribly alcoholic and beating up his wife every day. These are the stories that we see in our life where the possibilities are destroyed, So you are trying to transform a rose into a lotus, but we are all unique. We are all unique. And our system destroys that uniqueness. It is a bulldozer. And it is really a sad commentary that if you come to a school today and come to the class 11 science stream and ask students to raise their hand that how many of you do not want to go to IIT or medical, you see hardly any hand raising. That's iron. It's never possible. In nature, it is never possible. How come that everybody in the class wants to join IIT or medical? It is programmed. It is conditioned by the society, by the market. Possibly the other aspirations have never been allowed to come out, And the parents have constantly, the parent is saying a child is very musical, child loves music, Then immediately the parents, with their notion of discipline, enrolling the child into a coaching center and asking the child to master the techniques of physics, mathematics, and chemistry, and inculcating that ambition. So this is something unnatural happening. And I characterize it, it's a sick society that manufactures failure, where success itself is an illustration of failure. Failure of a meaning, failure in life, failure in creativity, So it's a sick society that manufactures failure. And that's why when a young person like you, thinking so deeply and asking a question of this kind, there is a hope. I convey my best wishes to you. See yourself, feel your heartbeat, think, feel what you feel like doing, thinking, explore. And be what, the inner flowering is important. Don't be like anybody else. Be yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There are a number of other comments and questions pouring in now. There is one person, T. Sachdev, he's written, "Thank you, sir, for articulating the anguish that a large number of the teachers have experienced during the pandemic." Dr. Sushmita Ram has written, "Thank you for opening our minds to the lack of critical thinking and reflection that we as teachers seem to have developed over the years." Richa has written, "Thank you, sir, for putting in words what I have been struggling with since some time. Empathy, compassion, and understanding could be only cornerstones of teaching." There's one question that Ranjini Shankar has written. "How do we generate collective churning for a transformative movement?"
Yeah. It's a very good reflection and a good question. And I tend to believe, that which I would say, is that with which this lecture began, recalling Gijubhai, and which I characterize as art of possibility. Somewhere, some of us, in our own small domain realm, in our classrooms, in our own engagement, in our own space that we get, we have to try our best to make small changes. And when we try to make those small changes in our everyday sphere of working, then there is a possibility that there can be a confluence of many of these possibilities. But if we keep waiting that somehow through a miracle, one day some collective change would take place, then we are mistaken. And I think that the collective change can take place only when in our own spaces, in our own realm, you and I, all of us in our own way, initiate a process, initiate a beginning, And that was what, for example, in a way, Gijubhai did it. And that is what I'm calling the art of possibility. And today, you and I, as teachers, students, have to seriously, celebrate that art of possibility. No matter what the constant is, what the structural constant is, that within that constraint, can you and I make some changes, some innovation? Can, even in that 40 minutes classroom, can you and I make it a little more meaningful, celebration, joyful? Can you and I create a moment with our students, with ourselves, a moment which is not purely instrumental, which is not merely about grade and measurement and exam success, but which is something deep, which is something meaningful? Can you and I try, make an attempt? And if those small changes begin to take place, those changes would lead to the confluence of many changes, and that might become a great movement one day. So this is the way, I would try to see it.
So there's another question that the student has asked that, reading Immanuel Kant, according to the student, reading Immanuel Kant during pandemic would make more sense, especially if you're reading the idea of duty. And furthermore, duty as a teacher, as a student of education, as a citizen. And they've written that rather Buddha or Ananda's philosophy seems even more abstract in these times because he's talking about consciousness after death. So it's how life and pandemic has been affecting our lives rather than a life after death. So she thinks that probably reading Immanuel Kant and the idea of duty that Kant talks of would make more sense.
No, that is quite possible. That is for the person, it is quite possible. The point that I was saying, it was not just about Kant. The point I was saying, something more, something that beyond the syllabus, that I'm saying that in my philosophy class, it is quite possible that Albert Camus' myth of Sisyphus is not there. or Albert Camus' the novel Plague is not there in my literature class. But at that time of the pandemic, how wonderful it would have been had the teacher also spoke of Camus' Plague, at the time of the pandemic. So I'm talking about it. Read Kant. Kant is immensely beautiful, powerful. Nobody is denying that. I just refer to Kant saying that just that something beyond syllabus can we do it, at a time which we feel at the time of pandemic has to be talked about. And that's why I'm saying that M.N. Srinivas's Rampura village is in the syllabus. That unknown village in Bihar is not in the syllabus. But that unknown village at the time of the pandemic has acquired a completely new meaning. M.N. Srinivas didn't see pandemic, but the student is seeing pandemic and seeing it in his own village. Now, should our education be so fossilized, dead, that it refuses to respond to the living reality, to the new reality that you and I see? That was the point that I was saying. And good luck with Kant, why not? Yes.
A second year BLH student says, thank you, sir, for your valuable ideas. But the thing is how practically we would apply these ideas now and in coming situations, as we do not know what is waiting for us in future. And my take from this knowledgeable session is that we need to be more practical, sensible, and flexible as a teacher or as a student. संतोष यादव राइट सर, आपको सुनना हमेशा सोचने पर मजबूर करता है. लगातार व्यवस्था और खुद के व्यवहार पर रिफ्लेक्ट करते रहना एक शिक्षिका के तौर पर हम आपसे सीखने की कोशिश करते हैं. आपके शब्द आर्ट ऑफ पॉसिबिलिटी हैं. Then, sir, there's a question. It is not easy to step out of our comfortable worlds and look at what needs to be done. What and how can this take place?
Yeah.
And then,
pardon?
no, sir, please carry on.
No, definitely, we work under a system, and the system is extremely pathological. And today it is being governed by techno managers with a very market-driven ideology of performance, achievement, and success. And as paid employees, as teachers, we are part of that system. And we work under this system. So there are structural constraints. So we know that it is an exceedingly difficult task. But in human life, two things happen, that there is a constant dialectic take place between the system, between the structural constraints and the human creativity and possibilities. Had this dialectic not taken place, then the world would not have changed. New ideas would not have emerged. Gautam Buddha would not have emerged. So Gandhi would not have emerged. Ambedkar would not have emerged. Illich would not have written that book. So things do change. And things do change because human being is both, a being who is structured by the society, but human being is also a possibility, a creative possibility who can defy the given structure, who can speak a new language of possibility, who can take a new step. And that was the way, for example, changes take place in the world. New ideas emerge. New possibilities come in the world. And that's why I'm saying that no matter how difficult the structural constraints are there is always a human possibility. And because of that human possibility, and this is what I would argue, the creative rebelliousness, also is there in the human possibility that enables us, that inspires us, makes it possible to do things. And that's why today, when we are talking about Gijubhai, so that very life generates that possibility, that art of possibility, that he could do things he could take his dreams seriously. He could innovate. He could create something which is different, which is a new possibility. So don't say that, that we are eternally doomed. And if we keep believing in that, and that is what actually the techno managers want us to believe us, that we are nothing but robotic performance. That is what the system wants us to believe, that we are just 9-to-5 workers with a salary. Beyond that, we are nothing, So, but don't believe in that. Don't take it as the ultimate truth. And if you take it as ultimate truth, then you have already accepted what the techno managers want you to do. Don't believe that, because they want you to believe that you are nothing except the cock. But we are not cock. As students and teachers, we are not cocks. We are communicators, we are friends, we are healers, we are wanderers. And that is what I believe a new student and teacher movement is needed when we begin to redefine ourselves. That we are not just measurable index, we are something more. We are something more. This is what I'm just saying. Yeah.
There is another question. A student has asked that you basically expressed the problem of curriculum, and in curriculum, the relationship between syllabus and pedagogy. So if the content or the syllabus is reflected upon, we may move towards a more relevant education in these times. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you think the existing syllabus, if we reflect on that, we can move forward towards a more relevant education?
I tend to believe, that it is a tragedy that our system doesn't allow a creative possibility or the creative surplus among students and teachers, because everything is already so defined and so structured that, and that I think is a very tragic thing. I think that if we see learning as a continual possibility of learning and unlearning, and that is what I am saying, that being constantly keeping the windows of our consciousness open and alive to the moment, being alive to the present, or what the Buddhists talk about, the mindfulness, Now, what our system does is that, and can we imagine there are many traditional universities where for 30 years syllabus has not been changed. Can you imagine even in some of our schools and colleges, teachers come with the notes which they took from their teachers when they were students? Now we all see this entire coaching center phenomenon, champion guidebook phenomenon, the same, as I said, that the same plagiarized questions and the plagiarized answers and the same kind of a syllabus. I think that what is the missing is that freedom, that when we become alive to the situation. And this is where, that I'll just give you an illustration. I was talking to a school teacher who teaches mathematics at a very fancy school in Gurgaon. Now, so I was just, I know her, so I was having a conversation with her. I asked her that, what is it you are teaching? So she was teaching now a chapter on percentage, profit and loss. And all of you as mathematics students must have seen that largely a large type of problems would be like that. The listed price of a t-shirt is 450 rupees. After giving 20% discount, the shopkeeper has still 8% profit. What is the actual price of the thing? Or a shopkeeper took a television set in 10,000 rupees and then he sold it in 13,000 rupees. What percentage of profit? So everything is essentially about the profit loss mercantile world. Now, I asked that teacher that imagine that one day you put a question like this in the classroom, that a bottle of Pepsi cost 30 rupees and the same amount of lemon water cost 10 rupees. And by what percent Pepsi cost more than lemon water? Now, in order to answer to that question, the child needs everything that the NCERT demands: the mathematical skill, calculation, measurement, percentage, fraction, everything the child needs. But when a question of this kind is asked, something else happens. It's not an age-old question about the listed price of a t-shirt and discount and all that. Then possibly the child, out of 50 children in the class, possibly 2 children would come back and then ask their parents, that tell me that while Pepsi is not such a healthy drink and the lemon water is also such not a bad drink, but why is it that Pepsi costs more than the lemon water? A question that might confront that student. And the moment that question comes, I'm not saying that parents have to be political economists to understand the economics of global capitalism and the multinational corporations. But what I'm saying that the moment this question is asked, then mathematics becomes subversive. Mathematics becomes not merely a logic of calculating profit and loss in the mercantile world. Mathematics also acquires a character through which now a question is coming about that why Pepsi cost more than lemon water. Pepsi colonialism, the question somehow has already entered into the mind of the student. Now, who has prevented the teacher from asking this question? Had Gijubhai been there, he would have said, that is precisely the art of possibility you are endowed with. And even in that Gurgaon school, that teacher, if he does it, then the teacher would realize that she is not just a robotic performer. There is still a possibility alive. And this is what I am saying, that don't think that revolution is something magical. One day it happens in a big way. And in the primetime television, Arnab Goswami comments on that. It's a small, silent, everyday endeavor of possibility and creativity. Small acts in our classroom, in our engagement with the children, with the students, in our process of learning and unlearning. And trust those small changes, those small possibilities. That is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Can I ask something? Ishaka?
Sure, Shalini.
So, I mean, your talk was music to the ears, but I have a question. How should we see children who are going to be missing out on school, who are going to, be left out of school for all kinds of reasons? Should we see that as, some of my friends feel, that they're escaping the structural violence of school? Or should we see, that there's a violence? What I mean is there's a violence within school, which is exacerbated by the pandemic. But there's also violence outside. So what's the sort of answer to that?
No, I completely agree with you. It's inside the school, and then many children who are out of that, and the trauma, the anxiety, and the violence that they experience. And that's why I believe, it's a very important question. I believe that how, as educationists, as students and teachers, who in certain way are also privileged because of our location, that how, in our own way, what we could do that to come out of the boundaries of the formal schools and colleges, and to reach those, that who have not been able to come, and to engage with them, to talk to them, and taking education and taking our engagement with the children, with the learners, beyond the four walls of the formalized school and classroom. So I think that's that's an important task. I know that many civil society organizations, good civil society organizations, seek to engage with that, do that. But at the same time, I believe that many of us who work in formal institutions, colleges, universities, schools, and if it is possible for some of us to engage much more deeply and meaningfully with these endeavors, when we try to reach those children, engage with them, relate to them, and trying to collectively make sense of the world we are living in, that would be a great endeavor. And I think that your question, should make all of us think about that, reflect on that. Yes.
Doctor, is there a question?
Yeah.
We can probably do one or two more questions and then probably.
So Alan Bosco writes, do you think that it was the spirit of wanderer that you speak of that differentiated the educational ideas of Tagore from Gandhi?
No, it's a good question. Let me respond to it in two ways, before I come to it, I'll just talk about 2 points about that entire engagement between Gandhiji and Rabindranath Tagore. It was a very beautiful engagement. And it was a beautiful engagement not because they agreed with each other on everything. And we all know there was a huge domain of disagreement. It all began, for example, with Gandhi's non-cooperation movement. Now, Tagore, with his poetic universalism, could not always give consent to the Gandhi's call of non-cooperation. And we all know there was exchange of letters between Gandhi and Tagore on that. This disagreement also erupted at the time of the Bihar earthquake, the way Gandhi looked at it, that it's a sin of untouchability, and the way Tagore referred to it, critiqued that. Now, so there's many issues, but at the same time, what was important is that never did they lose love and trust for each other. And till the last moment, Tagore died earlier, that both of them trusted each other. And when Tagore died, Tagore met Gandhi as essentially the main person to take care of Shantiniketan, So the relationship was so deep and so intense. Two things you see in that, in their persona, in their personality, that Gandhi, as a political activist, engaging himself with a spiritual question, with a religious question. And Tagore, as a poet, with a great Upanishadic longing for the universal and with a deep communion with nature, So there was a Upanishadic universalism, there was a romanticism, and there was a sense of wonder in entire Tagore's creation. And in Gandhi's thing, there was a political activism, politics as a domain of his sadhana, that he would say again and again in his experiment with truth, that the more political I become, the more spiritual I become, because my religiosity has to be tested in the domain of politics. So these were the two different, two persona. And with that, now it becomes easier to respond to your question, that there was a similarity at one level, what Gandhi did in Tolstoy farm in South Africa with children, with his pedagogic experimentation, and the way Tagore was talking about education. The similarity was that both of them were trying to break the barrier of work and play, academics and playful activity. So in Gandhi's Tolstoy form, that the way children would grow up and learn, and in the process of learning, they would also work in the kitchen. They would also clean the garden. They would engage in that. Similarly, as Tagore thought that the children would learn, there should not be any mechanical separation between academics and the play and the work. So they were thinking more in a non-dualistic manner, both of them. And Gandhi would call it the integration of the physical and the mental, that the intellect and the physical, learning through labor, learning through doing. And Tagore would also talk about, at the same time, that I learn also through play, through work, through activity, through engagement with nature things. But where your point comes, despite all those agreements, and where I believe you were right, but the point is come that one of the important things that would distinguish Tagore from Gandhi is that Tagore was much more, rhythmic, musical, and poetic. And that was one of the reasons. And Gandhi, with his notion of spiritual practice, with his notion of training of the self, experiment with the self, there was a sense of discipline. And in that time, this discipline, there was certain kind of harshness in that sense of discipline. But in Tagore, there was a very maternal, poetic, motherly touch. And that poetic, motherly touch was that which we could see in many short stories that Tagore wrote, Peddler from Kabul, or short stories where Tagore wrote about the pathology of a very regimented, fragmented kind of schooling. So as a result, the spirit of being a wanderer, be part of nature, looking at nature, being in rhythm with the nature, that how a tree, a river, a sunrise, a sunset, a flower, everything becomes a text. Everything becomes an important source of learning. And that, I believe, is very important sense of wanderer. And your question has actually acquired its meaning when, one of the person, Nandalal Bose, who grew up with both Tagore and Gandhi, Ashramite in Ye, but also very close to Gandhi. And Nandalal Bose was a great artist, art teacher, and he would describe that once he asked his students that draw the sketch of a tree, art students, and all of them within 5 minutes drew the sketch of the tree. And those sketches were technically perfect, but Nandalal was not very happy. He asked students, this is not what I'm asking you. You do something else. Each of you, and it is full of trees, each of you approach a tree and go near the tree at different moment of life. When the sun rises, at the time of when the sun is in the middle, in the evening, in late night, and approach a tree for 7-8 days. And when you approach a tree at different moments of the day for 6-7 days, then something might happen. Then one day the tree might begin to speak to you, because tree has different mood in the early morning and in the late night. Tree speaks in different languages at different moments. So I want you to hear that language, that voice. And only when you do that, and then when you draw the sketch of a tree, it is not just a mechanically perfect sketch. It acquires soul. It acquires life. That's the spirit of being a wanderer. That is the spirit of being a wanderer. And that, I believe, was one of the important gifts, and which also in a way we could see talk after talk by Jiddu Krishnamurti, unconditioning the spirit of being a wanderer. Yes.
Ms. Isha Verma asked, would you say that the role of teachers as activists is all the more crucial given the current socio-political climate? And how can we navigate this role given the dominant discourse and neoliberal forces suggest teaching should be apolitical?
Okay. It's a good question. I think that entire neoliberal market discourse is essentially driven by that logic that knowledge is essentially a set of cognitive, technical, managerial skills, and which have to be disseminated in the classroom. And the teacher is just the skill provider, and the student is the receiver. And in a discourse of that kind, when we are all atomized, discrete consumers and the products in the neoliberal discourse, it has its own politics. And that politics is the politics that sanctifies this market logic. So that's why the so-called value-neutral professional teacher, who doesn't talk about anything else, about Citizen Amendment Act, about farmers' resistance, about anything else, just comes to the class, approaches the blackboard, and just draws certain diagrams and teaches certain skills. That teacher is also political, but political in a different sense than you are talking about. That politics is the politics of silence, and the silence that legitimizes the market, that legitimizes the system. So many of our sanitized campuses of private colleges and the universities, 5-star private universities and colleges, where hardly you would find any poster, where hardly you would see, any play of Sadat Hasan Manto, or, for example, any beautiful poster, or any big photo of Che Guevara or Ambedkar. Hardly you would see. Absolutely clean, sanitized, 5-star private things in classrooms. Only thing it talks about is the placement agencies and salary packages. So that has its politics. And that politics is the politics of silence, leading to the conformity, approving, legitimizing that neoliberal market. So nothing is outside the politics. And that's why it is important that the politics that you and I choose. Now, if you and I choose a politics of a qualitatively different kind, that seeks to create a world which is inclusive, which is egalitarian, which gives importance to justice, to equity, then how is it possible that a teacher would remain indifferent to it? Now, for example, is it possible for a teacher who teaches physics to be completely indifferent to the phenomenon that how the science has often been hijacked by the system? Is it possible for a teacher to teach Michel Foucault in the classroom without ever talking about the all-pervading surveillance machineries through which a totalitarian state today seeks to have complete control over us? Is it possible to teach Judith Butler without ever talking about the kind of violence, gender violence that we see in our own campuses? Now, but if I pretend that no, I can just teach Judith Butler and Simone de Beauvoir or Michel Foucault or teach physics or science only as a skill, then I am doing a politics of a different kind, a politics that desensitizes you, a politics that deprives you of your critical voice, a politics that makes you a loyal conformist. But if you teach in a different way, with that worldview that we are, as teachers and students, we are questioning injustice and we are trying to strive for a world that should be more egalitarian, more eco-friendly, more sensitive, more human, then our knowledge cannot be, or our activity cannot be separated from that sensitivity, that question. And when I say that, I'm not saying that a teacher has to become a member of a political party. That I am not saying. Politics is beyond being a member of a political party. Politics is being beyond contesting the elections. Politics, I am saying, as a worldview, as a voice, as a critical voice, as a reflexive voice, as an inner churning. So one need not be member of a political party. One need not contest the elections. But politics as a thinking, as a creative thinking, as a critical thinking, as an acute awareness of the discourse of power, the way power operates in the society, how come teachers can become indifferent to it? If they say that they can become indifferent to it in the name of so-called value neutrality, that is not actually value neutral. That is essentially in conformity with the system. That is the point that I would argue.
Thank you, sir. I think we've taken most of the questions and comments. There are quite a few other comments as well, but I think we're running short of time. So I request our Student Council President, Twinkle Opal, to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Pathak, for the insightful talk. We take this opportunity to thank faculty members for their constant support and guidance throughout. We thank Mr. Gaurav for providing technical assistance before and during the event. I also want to thank Student Council for working constantly to organize this event. We thank everyone for joining for the lecture today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Is it okay now?
Yes, Professor Pathak, yes.
So, okay.
Thank you, Professor Pathak.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.